Chapter 8. Sarah turned away sadly as the flashing of the ambulance disappeared. Jeremy was quietly waiting and watching. "Did you know him well?" he asked. How could she begin to explain to anybody else how she was feeling? She couldn't even explain it to herself. "Not really," she said. "But he was a good man, and a brave one. It's silly, I know, but I feel as if I'd lost my best friend." How inadequate words were after all. I don't think it's silly at all. She looked at his concerned face, and then felt guilty that she should be surprised. "You're rather sweet, Jeremy," she said. The excited crowd which had gathered was melting away. A uniformed constable was removing the temporary barriers which had been erected around the area. Sarah looked for the brigadier. To keep in touch with him would almost be like being with the doctor still, but there was no sign of him. He was probably with the police somewhere. He'd have plenty of official stuff to keep him busy. She was being childish. "This is no good," she said. "Life must go on." Well, that's what he would want, isn't it? He'd surprised her again. "You're right, of course. Come on. We'd better get back to the office and get these pictures developed." As they walked the length of Galaxy Avenue, with its alien water sculptures, to call them fountains would be an insult. How could a simple fountain twist into such shapes? Sarah could hear a sound like the roar of an impatient football crowd. As they approached the main entrance, the gates swung open, and Space World's first real customers started to pour through in their hundreds. Life would go on, with or without the permission of Sarah Jane Smith. By the time the CID man from Golders Green had satisfied himself that the double death was probably not connected with the body on the heath, the brigadier was getting impatient. They had been closeted together in the little room Kitson had found for them for what seemed like hours. At last he closed his notebook with a snap. "Seems clear enough," he said. "We'll need to find out a bit more about Mr. Grebber's background, but that apart, and there's the autopsy, of course. But that's more or less a formality in the circs." But the brigadier was hardly listening. The doctor's death didn't mean that his own investigation had to come to a full stop. So what now? "My dear brigadier, I cannot begin to tell you how devastated we are," said Freeth, rising nimbly from his gargantuan swivel chair to greet his visitor. "Kind of you," grunted the brigadier. "We have our own occasion of grief, of course," Freeth continued. "The man Grebber, poor, foolish, troubled soul. But nothing compared to the loss of a colleague. And a friend?" His unctuous voice vied with the fleshy solicitude of his face. He seated himself on the sofa, which was covered with a richly coloured Gohelan tapestry, by a coffee table surfaced in mosaic, an apparently genuine ancient mosaic, as if from a Roman villa, but portraying a fearsome alien beast under a hyacinth sky. He motioned to the easy chair opposite. "This is a social occasion," the gesture said. "Let us be intimate together. Let us mourn together." The brigadier remained standing. "Be that as it may," he said, "I am here on official business. I have to ask you to cancel the opening of Space World." Freeth's manner changed instantly. His eyes narrowed, and the soft curves of his face noticeably hardened. "Do you indeed?" he said. "And I have to tell you that I have no intention of complying." The brigadier's face was equally hard. "Then I shall be forced to close it down." "I understood from that boy who described himself as a detective sergeant that his inquiries here were closed." On whose authority do you propose to take this officious action? My own, sir. I see. On what grounds? For a moment, the brigadier hesitated. It would not be acting outside his powers to shut Spaceworld with no explanation at all. Freeth's cool arrogance deserved no less. However, it might not be good policy. He needed Freeth's cooperation. Before he died, he said reluctantly, the doctor told me of certain suspicions he had. Until I am satisfied that these suspicions are groundless, I cannot allow you to proceed with your plans. As Freeth listened, he seemed to relax. He spoke more gently. My dear Brigadier, you should have come to me sooner. You're too late. If you listen, you'll no doubt be able to hear the baying of the great British public bent on pleasuring itself. Or is that the phrase I'm after? He smiled winningly, his head tilted to one side like a manipulative toddler. His manner had quite reverted to its habitual bantering lightness. We shall have to clear them all out, then, said the Brigadier harder than ever. As officer commanding the United Nations Intelligence Task Force in the UK, I am empowered, under the treaty, to take any action I consider necessary to safeguard international security. Ah, but there are so many forms of power, aren't there? Freeth arose from the sofa. In spite of the situation, the Brigadier couldn't help thinking of a hot air balloon casting off its moorings. As Freeth walked back to his desk, he smiled again. Before you get stuck into the political mire of exactly who has the power to do what and to whom, I would strongly advise you to read this. He opened a drawer and produced a letter. The Brigadier's lips tightened as he saw the impressive letterhead. He glanced down at the signature. Not only was the letter from number 10, it was signed by the Prime Minister himself. Freeth was clearly enjoying himself. It hurts the pride, doesn't it, falling flat on one's face? Never mind, he added comfortably. I'm sure Mummy will kiss it better. But, General, it was a personal letter guaranteeing him and his precious corporation freedom from interference of any kind whatsoever. The Brigadier was sitting in the doctor's car, speaking to the World Headquarters of UNIT in Geneva. In such a delicate matter, it would be most unwise to use a public phone, or worse still, one in the Paracon office block. The General was sympathetic, but ultimately unhelpful. His authority, wide though it undoubtedly was, could not override that of the government of a host country in such a situation. The Brigadier was determined that Freeth should not get away with it. Would you have any objections, sir, if I went over your head to New York, then? To the Security General, none at all. I don't hold out much hope, though. Use my name if you like. Armed with this authority, it took the Brigadier a surprisingly short time to get through. The Secretary-General of the United Nations, however, intercepted on her way to a meeting of the Security Council, was clearly not pleased. Her transoceanic accent, a fitting symbol of her position, sometimes obscured the meaning of an individual word, but her total message could not have been clearer. No, Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart, she replied to his urgent plea. I shall not speak to Mr. Freeth. To the contrary, you would be well advised to butter up his feathers, as the saying goes. It is of the most utmost imperative that he is not to be made upset. The Brigadier tried again, in vain. Understand me clear, she went on. You will be held personally responsible if through any action of yours there is any hitches in these delicate negotiations." The Brigadier sat up. "What negotiations?" But the Secretary-General, saying that she had said quite too much already, put the phone down on him. "Blast," said the Brigadier. Sitting in the little yellow car, he reviewed the situation. To his chagrin, he soon came to the conclusion that his pursuing of Freeth over the closing of the theme park was a displacement activity designed to stop himself facing a most disturbing fact. He had no idea what to do next. If he hadn't had the assistance of the doctor at all, it would have been quite clear. Even if Freeth had claimed the protection of the great Panjandrum of Outer Mongolia, he would have applied for a warrant to search the whole of Space World. A large task, but not impossible with the help of the Met. "But what would I be searching for Pete's sake?" he said to himself. "The creature that killed the fellow, presumably, traces of blood, all that stuff." But the doctor had said the monsters were all harmless. He allowed himself the luxury of thinking about the doctor, and found to his surprise that his prime emotion was anger. Not that he'd been left in the lurch, more that a long-established friendship, a friendship of unacknowledged depth, had been so unmercifully cut short. The wretched fellow had no need to risk himself. Help had been on its way. It was a foolish, sentimental, unnecessary way to die. After all they'd been through together, the very real dangers they had faced. His mind went back to the early days. That brush with the Yetis in the London Underground. Those uncanny Cybermen. Living creatures or robots, or both. And then... But as usual, his mind shied away from the thought of his next encounter with the doctor. A doctor utterly changed, with a different face, a different personality, but undeniably the same individual he'd known before. What had he called it? Regeneration, or some such poppycock? How could anybody believe such arrant nonsense? And yet, in spite of himself, the Brigadier felt a faint stirring of hope, but it soon faded. There had been no sign of anything of the sort in the limp figure carried away by the ambulance men. The doctor had been dead. Hang on, though. What about that time at Devil's End? At first he'd been given up for dead, only to revive something like 10 hours after having been frozen solid. The Brigadier's melancholy abruptly disappeared. If there were the slightest chance... But he'd been taken away a corpse. He'd been in the mortuary now. And as the sergeant had said, there'd have to be an autopsy, and in the very nature of things they didn't hang around. Regenerating might prove a little difficult, with one's tripes taken out. "So, what delights have they found for us today, Brian?" said Mortimer Willow to his assistant, as he donned the green surgical robe the mortuary attendant had put out for him. His voice bounced satisfactorily off the white-tiled walls. The Professor was famous for singing at his work. Better than the bathroom, he always said. "It's the two chaps who fell, Professor." Brian Pribble switched on the big central light, dispelling the early evening gloom. "Of course. Took a swallow dive from the top board. Pity the pool was empty." Dr. Preble peered at him through his thick spectacles. No, he said earnestly. "They fell from manner of speaking. Glory be to Gladys, thought the Professor. None of these youngsters seem to have a sense of humour any more. "There's something very odd about one of them," said Preble. "First things first." The Professor eased on a pair of surgeon's gloves. "Where have you got to?" His assistant picked up a piece of paper. "Apparently there's no question of how they died, so there's no need for a full forensic investigation. But the investigating officer would like to know if either of them..." He squinted at the paper. had been ingesting or otherwise introducing into their systems any substance which might have impaired their bodily coordination or powers of judgment. In other words, were they pissed or stoned? Why couldn't he just say that? In any case, he's wrong. Even if these fellows had been found dead after falling from the top of the north face of the Eiger, we should still have to check for possible causes of the fall. Some sort of vascular incident, perhaps, a myocardial infarction or a cerebral hemorrhage, for example. Things are not necessarily as simple as they seem. Still, I feel sure we should be able to satisfy your verbose friend one way or another. Have you taken the fluid samples? I have, and the subjects are all ready for you, but the odd thing is, let's have a shufti, eh? A what? A look-see, a viewing, an ocular demonstration. Ignorant as well. Where's Tom, as if I didn't know? He strode to the door and pushed it open. A large and puzzled-looking man in the corridor looked up from the telephone. "I'm sorry, I gotta go," he said into the mouthpiece. "I know, but I tell you, I gotta go. I'm sorry." He put the phone down and came into the room. "Sorry, Prof," he said. The professor followed him in. "How is your love life, then?" "Sorry?" "Getting our oats, are we?" The attendant looked even more puzzled. "That's just it. Never stops whinging, does she?" "I should be infinitely obliged to you if you could tear yourself away. Dr. Preble and I would like to get home sometime tonight. We have our own oats to consider." "Sorry, Prof," said Tom, and pulled out one of the drawers. Willow looked down at the naked figure with the front of its skull smashed in, several ribs protruding from the chest, and a compound fracture of the right arm. There was a label tied around the left foot. On it was written, "William Jephthah Greber." "Nothing odd that I can see." "It's the other one. Thank you, Tom." The attendant pulled out the next drawer. "This one hasn't got a name, Prof," he said. The label simply said, "Doctor." Willow looked up. "Wrong body, Tom," he said. "Where'd you get this chap?" No, this is the one. I was here when they were both brought in," said Dr. Preble, hopping from one foot to the other like a schoolboy bursting to pee. The professor looked again. Surely this man had never fallen over 200 feet. Perfect in form, the alabaster figure was without blemish or mutilation of any sort. "How very odd," he said. "I told you, there's not a single bone broken." "Curiouser and curiouser," said Alice. The professor's eyes gleamed in the harsh light. "In the circumstances, I think we should give this gentleman a certain priority." As his assistants lifted the body onto the stone slab in the middle of the room, he walked over to the table where his instruments were. He surveyed the range of scissors, saws, chisels, and the rest, spread out for his choice. He picked up a fine-pointed dissecting knife with a 4-inch blade as sharp as an old-fashioned cutthroat razor. "Now, what'll it be?" he said. "A selection from White Horse Inn,